having around positionality. It's like, what are the ingredients that go into making up this thing called positionality? And place is one of them. But there are 5 things that generally come forward when one deals with positionality. The first is age. The second is they're not in this order, but a second condition or aspect would be one's ethnicity, one's gender, where one speaks from, one's nationality, and occupation. So I'd like in the chat for all of you to put in the chat, I am, your age, your ethnicity, your gender, where you're joining us from, and your occupation. Just in the chat. Those of you that are joining online can put this on a piece of paper because we'll refer to it a little bit later. So I'm hoping to see some of that coming up in the chat. And on the screen, we're joined by Tebza. He's one of the members of a group, a dance group called the Intellectuals. And I thought really important that we consider the intellectuals for this session as we're coming to know them. I made a comment that Tebza and the intellectuals are from Soweto. We can see from the image on the screen, we can see his age, plus minus 20 something, 20, 30 something, ethnicity, gender, place, and occupation. So this is what we come to know when we meet somebody. We walk into a room, we step into a classroom, we step onto a bus, we enter into any kind of public environment. And we read another person. We read another person through these external criteria. And what does this do? And it's what you see. It's what you see about a person. These criteria or these qualities that speak to a person's positionality in the world comes with a set of, what would you call them? Power dynamics, hierarchies, ways of relating. So you walk into a room, you're a woman, you walk into a room, it's filled with men. Gender plays an incredibly important dynamic in that social context. You're a man, you walk into a room, it's filled with women. How does this change? You're a 20-something-year-old, you walk into a room, it's filled with 50-something-year-olds. These readings of the individual, what you see, comes with a whole set of perceptions, conditions, hierarchies, power dynamics. Ethnicity. You know, we come from places that are still tainted by the histories of apartheid and the histories of coloniality. So as a white person, you walk into a particular space, and what does this start to do in terms of how you're engaging in that space? So the important thing is what is positionality in terms of your place within an environment. So these things that you see have power. I've got some positionality statements in the chat. So I think a really important introduction is maybe just to say a little bit more about myself. I said I'm speaking to you from Cape Town, but I'm also speaking to you as a co-founder of the African Fashion Research Institute. And so again, looking at positionalities, I'm a 50-something white female, South African born researcher. And it's really, really important that as the African Fashion Research Institute, it is where my position in this research institute is balanced together with that of Lesiba Mabatsela, who's the co-founder of the African Fashion Research Institute. Again, thinking about those dynamics of those positionalities and how that then influences or shapes the way in which the African Fashion Research Institute, or AFRI, comes to be. What are these different positionalities bringing to this knowledge? And positionality has been very instrumental in the last, I would say maybe in the last decade, we've seen a real shift. That positionality matters in terms of research. So in the academic space, in the universities, positionality is really important. Where you're studying from. So for example, and we've got Tebza on the side again, we're not forgetting our dance moves. Positionality in terms of research. So if I am researching, and in this case it would be Pansula, if I'm researching Pansula, what does my positionality allow me to know or not know about that space of research? And what kinds of implicit knowledges or biases or conditions have shaped my entry to that world? And because Lesiba and I are working as the African Fashion Research Institute, in this space of fashion research, we're not only speaking about something material, we're speaking also about all that other stuff that comes with fashion, which is that sort of deep connection to identity, the deep connection to space, to social environments. And so a lot of our work has been looking at fashion from this particular lens. So I'd like to pause here a little bit with a question for you. How do we read this object? What is it? Is it a brooch? Is it a head wrap? Do we know it? Is it something familiar? We can see it's textile. The clues on the side don't give us much either. It's a photograph by Michelle Pirchulam from an exhibition called Untangled Tales. What if I tell you that this is a head wrap with a very particular meaning that says, meet me at the corner in the morning. Not meet me at the corner in the evening, because that would have a different fold. Not there's trouble on the horizon, because that would be another set of folds. So this is from a project by Michelle Picholan. She is a first generation Surinamese who lives in the Netherlands, investigating the history of these head wraps called the Angisa. They're a set of head wraps that date back to the time of Dutch slavery in Suriname, when Suriname was a colony. And the use of head wraps and the use of very particular folds allowed for a set of communication that would transmit these knowledges. And obviously, the codedness of that language was knowledge made available to a particular community and made unreadable to another community. And obviously really important, this unreadability, but also this common readability. So all of us in the room that are unable to read this, it is our positionality that has conditioned us in the sense that we don't read it. We haven't come across it. We haven't learned it. We don't know it. But what determines these knowledges? And then, what is knowledge? How do we respond to objects? How do we respond to subjects? How do we respond to fashion, for example? What are the lessons we've been taught? How do we respond to architecture? How do we respond to mountains or to trees or to each other? Is knowledge just the result of something that we've been taught? Or is knowledge something beyond that? There are some knowledges that are far more shared. And I think this image was taken in 2017. It's a far more recent image. But again, we're kind of looking at what are the signs that are encoded in this image that is readable to a very broader global community? Why are some meanings globalized? Some concept of we can do it. Where some knowledges, like the Angisa, have been pushed to the periphery, so much so that hardly anybody knows about it. So again, I'm talking about privilege. Whose knowledges are privileged? What kind of knowledges are privileged? What kind of knowledges and what kind of histories or bodies or ways of being are forefronted? And so a lot of the work that we do as the African Fashion Research Institute is really trying to think about what is this coloniality of knowledge. It's about whose knowledge, how we respond to objects, how we respond to mountains, how we respond to buildings, how we respond to disaster. Whose knowledge is that which circulates, dominates, becomes the way in which our responses are conditioned. We often get this when we travel. We kind of leave a little bit of something that would not maybe be welcome when we go to another place. We're kind of conditioned to leave some things outside and bring other things with us. And there's very, very, very powerful impact of colonialism in the world that has dominated what kind of knowledges are privileged, what kind of knowledges have the most power. We see it in the art world. We see it in the fashion industry. We see it in education. We see it in textbooks. That concept of European or Western or that of the global North as the kind of privileged voice. So whose positionalities in the knowledge hierarchy have been given priority, have been given the most power, have been given the most voice. So that is why positionality matters. So I thought this was a really, really, really beautiful moment and a beautiful quote by Yvonne Tirukirangi. Maybe if you kind of think about that for yourselves, our positionality is the embodied pivot from which our knowledge making materializes. So this embodiment of one's knowledge making, this is where we come from. This is where we come to know from. So looking back at your positionality statement, your knowledge making materializes, comes from that particular place of your positionality. And each of you in the room, your positionalities are nuanced by these power dynamics, by these positions in relation to one another. And you'll see that Tebsa is coming closer into view. I hope you're taking note of those moves on the side. So where do you come to know from? Where do you come to know from? And I think I'm wanting you to maybe revisit that positionality statement with another layer. I'm not asking you to put this into the chat, but maybe just to for yourself if you're making notes. But this is a really important sort of thinking about. Where do you come to know from? And I want you to think about three influences in your upbringing that have been key to who you are today. Three influences, influences, or maybe even influencers. Maybe it was your grandmother. Maybe it was your education. Maybe it was a program on television. Maybe it was a journey you did when you were growing up, a particular kind of journey. Maybe it was a book. Maybe it was a book. Just for yourselves, list three things that kind of really influenced you while you were growing up. Could have been a teacher. Could have been a hobby. me come back to those influences. But I'm wondering if anybody wants to just share. Put your mic on and just share one of those influences. Something that had a profound impact on who you are today in terms of the person you are, in terms of where your knowledge sources. Glorina, hi.
Hi. Very interesting topic. I would say my three influences are: one, my mom; two, a show called Top Billing. Because of Top Billing, I studied interior design. I was so obsessed with it. And I thought I'd actually end up just my entire life designing high-end, residentials. And that's how I landed up when I was changing schools in high school in grade 10. I got to the new school and the principal was like, the only way we can accept her is if she studies design. She takes design as a subject. And I wanted accounting at the time, but I had been speaking to my parents about interior design in the background because they'd watch me watching Top Billing. And that's literally how my design journey started in high school. And I'd have my classes in the afternoon. And after matric, I then enrolled into a private college. I studied interior design and interior decorating. And then because, again, that's why I love this topic. I found that, looking at my roots, that I actually come from a very colorful background. So my dad's side has some roots, Afrikaans roots, but also Indian.
Oh.
And I found that my great-grandfather on my grandmother's side was actually from Malaysia. And you would classify him under your Cape Malays. So then I started to understand why she cooks the way she does, why she uses certain spices. And that was the beginning of, I guess, where I ended up right now because of that. It started to push me to ask questions of where I come from, and why we look the way we do, because people would make comments, but you have a bit of Indian, but when they look at our hair and things like that. So I started also watching a lot of documentaries on ancient Africa. Now I started getting interested in tribes and civilizations and the start of these civilizations on the continent, as well as the movement, of people on the continent. And then I ended up merging design and African history. And I decided to then use textiles as a tool to sort of express that into pattern. So I think it's been like a journey. But when I look back to Glorina the child, my mom was a teacher. And she always comes back during the holidays with like these coloring books. That's where also my love for color and pattern comes from. And that's what would like keep me not just busy, but I found that became like my sacred space. Color became my calming tool, should I say. That's why I find comfort, because I grew up an introvert. I didn't speak that much. I was very shy. But give me a pencil, like coloring pencils and Kokies, then I'm able to express myself. So it now only makes sense how I landed up here. But also what you mentioned about positioning, very important. The kind of primary school and a little bit of the high school, the kind of schools that our parents took us to, exposed us to other racial groups, kids who are literally from like China, as in like not born in South Africa. They literally just got from China. They literally just landed yesterday. from Spain, from the UK. So we grew up around, playing and during break, interacting with children from all these different ethnicities, racial groups, and they would also share with us, how they grew up, and we'd see what they eat during lunch. So that started to open up our perspective so much that now that we're adults, we are able to interact with people from various groups, whereas somebody who didn't have that kind of opportunity sees it as a barrier. But for us, we are able to literally move from space to space seamlessly and with confidence because we were exposed to that. So yeah.
I think that's thank you so much for sharing, because I think what you've also just illustrated, that a positionality statement of who you are in terms of those things that we see, all these things we don't see. We don't see where you schooled. We don't see that your mum influenced you. We don't see that your grandmother has a particular panache for lovely Malay cooking. So it's the things we don't see that also influence, but possibly even more, because these are the things that really drive you. So I'm very interested. I'm going to take us a little bit further, but I'm very interested if anybody else would like to share at this point. It's such a rich place. But maybe I will share. I recently lost my mom. So I'm going through a series of photographs. Obviously, we need to process a whole lot of stuff. And so this is a photograph of my mom, but that's not me in the photograph. That's my older sister. I was 2 at the time. And this is a photograph of our Christmas holidays, our December holidays, probably from age of about 2, probably through to about the age of about 12 or 13, or maybe even 14. We lived in Natal. We grew up in Natal, and over the December holidays, our little nuclear family, it was my mom and 2 older brothers and a sister and myself and my twin sister, the 5 of us would go for our December holidays. We would go to the Eastern Cape. We also went to Mozambique. We also went to Lesotho, and we would spend time in these places over the December holidays. And how that had such an important impact. And Glorina, maybe just to reiterate for you, it was as a child coming in contact with other sensibilities, with other ways of being in the world, with other environments and other communities, and how important that was. What would happen after our December breaks in these more rural places is we would go back to school, and obviously this is apartheid South Africa. This photograph was taken in 1970. So you can understand that the context of my upbringing is I was obviously in a whites-only school. So I'm going back into the classroom after my December break, and I've come to know something else, and yet the rest of my class does not. The rest of my class do not. So it's also this tension between how we navigate, how we come to knowledge, and how important that is. And so maybe positionality is so much more than what we see. Positionality, who we become, what we are in this world, is a combination of so many more things. It's what language you speak. It's what you believe. It's what you heard. It's maybe what you saw. It's maybe what you read. So this thing like education, you mentioned your mother, possibly things like intergenerational. Your positionality is a combination of the generation. It's an intergenerational positioning in the world. Who your parents were, who your grandparents were, how they relate to the world, where they moved, where they didn't move, what they bring, what they brought. It's not just, you're not just like an island. So very often when you're thinking about positionality, on the front of it, you're a certain set of qualities, but it's these other qualities that make you unique, that makes positionality such a complex space. I am a first generation white South African, but it is the things that I heard, it's the things that I saw, it's the places I visited, it's the things I read that have had an incredible impact on how I position myself in relation to others. And so these things that you've kind of identified as influences or influencers in your upbringing, I want you maybe for now, but also maybe to pin it or mark it for later. What are the worldviews related to those influences? What are the worldviews that those particular influences had? And I'm going to use the top billing example because, Glorina, you mentioned it. What are the worldviews that came with that top billing? What are the worldviews that came with your mother? What are the worldviews that came maybe perhaps with your schooling? What are the worldviews embedded in a book that had an incredible impact on you? And then very closely associated with those worldviews is a set of values. And then with that set of values, I think what we need to ask, whose values? And this is why positionality is so important. It is where you speak, write, create from. It's kind of so the embodied pivot from which your knowledge making materializes, where you speak, right? So these other criteria, these other values, these other important influences in who you became or who you have become, that is where your positionality is rooted. So I've been talking about this in terms of yourself and your positionality. But at the same time, I'm wanting you to think about positionality in terms of your brand or in terms of your business. In the same way that you could say, I am a 50-something-year-old white South African female fashion researcher. My business, AFRI, is a 5-year-old multicultural, multidisciplinary fashion research institute based in South Africa. So can you think about your business in terms of a positionality statement, a female-led business? So in the same way that you're kind of unpacking your own personal positionality, on the side of this, I'm wanting you to think about your own business and its positionality. And then in the same way that you kind of unpacking the influences of what it is that became you, what were the key influences that became your business? What are the key influences and the key worldviews that became your influence? I mean, that became your business. So this is what I'm saying is that, you know, in 2 hours, I think there's quite a bit that we're needing to kind of, so you might want to park this on the side as a kind of, I want to go back to that. I want to go and unpack that a little bit more. Because it's this question of world making and value that I think as entrepreneurs is really important. So world making is the way we collectively make the spaces around us through symbolic practices. So I think what's really important is this question of the collective. It's not a singular journey. World making is not a singular journey, it's a collective journey. It starts to color the spaces around us. So if you're making interior design, it starts to, you know, fill the space with things, with objects. If you're in fashion design, you're making clothing that fills the spaces. You're making moments. If you're in education, in gaming, I think, I mean, I'm very aware that there are a couple of gaming and XR and AR people in the room, and I'm curious to think if anybody wants to join in and say something about world making and positionality from that kind of gaming space, because I think gaming and world making is a very big conversation. If anybody wants to add in there. Mm. Yep. Okay. But I think this question of symbolic practices, and I'm going back to the Angisa, the head wrap, it's a symbolic gesture. It's a practice of symbols. In the same way that Nike is a practice of symbol, it sells some clothes, but it's a symbolic practice of in the world. So I'm taking this quote from an exhibition in Johannesburg, but I think this is such a key point to this question of positionality. So yeah, really mark this. So it comes from this exhibition called Ecospheres. So that quote on world making came from this exhibition. Those of you in Johannesburg, do yourself a favor and visit the exhibition. It's a curator-led invitation to view, so you do need to make a booking to view the exhibition, and there are particular time slots that then allow you to engage with the curator with the exhibition. Those of you not in Johannesburg, do yourself a favor and download the catalog. There's an online catalog called Ecospheres. A very beautiful, beautiful catalog. And what this question of world making addresses, it's a 3-year theme that they're looking at. So over a period of, this is the first exhibition that just opened this year. And over 3 years, they're really looking at this question of world making. And why are they looking as artists, but also for yourselves as creatives? What is our role in world making? And why, and particularly for this exhibition, what are we listening to? Who are we listening to for advice or guidance or knowledge on world making? Kian.
So a question just came to mind. Thanks so much. One key word that you mentioned a few times is business, and it's an interesting aspect in our journey, especially as participants in the cultural and creative industries, and reconciling our cultural production and art with being a business and needing to make profit, make revenue, and quite interested in your journey in that, because you're obviously an institute conducting research, but you said you're a business, so clearly you need to make profit, and how that has influenced your positionality.
Okay. I'm not sure if the question is asking me to talk about the African Fashion Research Institute as a business in relation to profit.
Yes, because obviously when you're talking about worldviews and your positionality as being a business, that's a position, but then also positionality as being somebody that is a cultural producer, a researcher, and how you've kind of reconciled those two different aspects.
Thank you for that. There is a long answer and there's a short answer. It's complicated. That's the long answer. It's complicated. Coloniality is everywhere. Capitalism is everywhere. The need to survive in a world has been linked so closely or so tightly to the role of money that to untangle that is a really important part of the process, but also is a collective process. So where we are in the world, and this exhibition, and it's interesting that you bring it up now, but this exhibition in world making starts to consider we all know the scale of climate catastrophe, the scale of war, the scale of suffering is led by this greed of capitalism. So to untangle, so one of the readings that really supports this work and some of the other work that I am also involved in is Arturo Escobar on the pluriverse. And so to think about your business, or to think about our business as the African Fashion Research Institute, profit isn't everything. Profit or financial flow is one component, in the same way that the pluriverse is thinking about systems, fashion systems, industrial systems, production systems is one component of the universe, of what we are. The damage that is being done is that the profit has been identified or framed as the only route to succeed, or the only route to take. How do we start to undo this as the only possible route and find multiple routes? And what are those values starting to do? So it's a journey. It's a journey to think through, and that's why I'm coming back to these worldviews. Who are we listening to? How are we listening to these questions? And I'm coming to this from a number of places. So one, I look at the work of artists, we look at the work of what's coming through in these really important conversations around the future of the world. And so this is a Future Observatory journal. It is the Design Museum in London, and it's one of their first issues of this Future Observatory journal. And it's the same question around profit or kind of financial extraction. And we all know, you know, the extreme violence that is happening and particularly on the African continent, in terms of mineral extraction at the cost of the land. We know it happens in the Eastern Cape. We know that there's real violence to people's lives. So instead of extraction, so this kind of, are there alternate ways? So the same with business. Are there alternate ways? Instead of being extractive, I'm just going to take your money. Can we take a more regenerative approach? That means enhancing rather than exhausting resources. Enhancing rather than exhausting communities. Enhancing and rather than exhausting landscapes. And the important thing is that we're starting to see something happening in the world. That these undervalued materials, and I know also some of you in the cohort are also working with undervalued materials, waste materials, secondhand materials, rubber tires that no longer, you know, they're undervalued, they're thrown away, you know, move on to the next best thing. So, you know, what is it to think about those undervalued materials? But also, and this is what's really, really key, is this cultivation of undervalued knowledges. So come back right to the beginning. Whose knowledges have been valued, prioritized? They're in the textbooks, they're everywhere, they're on the TV, they're, you know, and whose knowledges have been undervalued? And what are those knowledges that have been undervalued? There is a really important, a really interesting writer. She's an architect, but she's published a book called Low Tech, L-O-T-E-K, Low Tech. And she's an architect based in Australia. And thinking about these low technological knowledges, ecological knowledges, these traditional ecological knowledges that we've kind of ignored at our peril. Traditional ecological knowledges, and we all know them from our childhoods, from people further afield. And what are these traditional ecological knowledges able to teach us or able to tell us? So this question of and what has been systematically undervalued. It's also a question of who has been systematically undervalued. And in design, and particularly in fashion, there's been a kind of sacrifice zone of fashion. Whose knowledges, whose aesthetics, whose values have been systematically undervalued. Ways of dressing or ways of making, skills or knowledges. So we all know kind of the history of colonialism was the colonizer arrived and sort of said, we have fashion, you don't. Fashion is this Eurocentric thing, a suit, a dress. Fashion is not what you have cherished or you have created. So this divide is kind of continued to this day, where Western fashion has a kind of hierarchy of being fashion because it's in the global north, and cultural fashion is kind of relegated to things like ethnographic museums. So how do we start to regenerate, bring attention to, think about? And I know some of you are working with this in terms of cultural practice, in terms of cultural, bringing these kind of cultural values back into dialogue. So this is quite an important paper by Sandra Neeson on fashion and its sacrifice zones, particularly in relation to sustainability. We cannot think about sustainability if people are being sacrificed, if cultures are being sacrificed. It means that it's serving only one particular set of people, but if there are other communities that are being sacrificed, and whether those sacrifices are environmental sacrifices. We all are aware of what secondhand clothing is doing in rivers or in beaches or in deserts. It's sacrificing the livelihoods of those future communities. It's not that, so whether H&M is trying to be sustainable, its clothing is still landing up in a landfill. We cannot have sustainability if there's sacrifice. So really kind of thinking about the impact of what you do in terms of these knowledge systems, these world values. And so I chose this image because I think it's quite an important one for us to kind of pause with. It is how we're all connected. And we are an ecosystem. And each of us in our very different ways. This is the pluriverse that we're kind of speaking about. Not a universe, not a singular hegemony of one way of being, but it is in the ecosystem, it is in that diversity that we need to start to bring back. So there's not one single route of being in the world, one single route of survival, one single way of knowing. So I think holding this sort of space, this ecosystem, thinking about your brand or your business within this ecosystem, each of those individuals are kind of connected. Your brand is kind of connected to a whole lot of who else, what else is your brand in relation to? it's that relation to, that relationality, that relation to others, to other worldviews, to other communities, to other environments. Your brand has a relationship to a piece of land, to an environment of land. So it's thinking about that interconnectivity. And it's not just in the present tense. Because I think what's really important is how do we connect with our knowledges as a kind of generational thing? What is this sort of intergenerational knowing? How do we use what we do to bring pathways of that intergenerational knowledge? And where does it stop? I mean, sometimes you listen to elders, and somewhere along the line, that information just starts to die. Like languages start to die, and cultural knowledges or history start to die. And what is it that is creating that unknowing, or creating that loss of diversity, that loss of knowledge? It's because it's not in the textbooks. It's because it's not valued, because it's pushed to the side, it's marginalized. And so thinking about your worldviews, thinking about your values, what are those values that you kind of bring back in, that you need to nurture, create space for? Because what it is that you're seeding, what it is that you're doing, it is about your survival as a business, as an entrepreneur. It is about your survival, but it is also about what you're planting for the future. So just like your positionality is a result of that kind of intergenerational, your cohort, but also your ancestors. The way in which you think about your business. And I'm putting this question there around, who does your business serve? And it's a broad kind of question. Who does your business serve? Who in the world, who in your world does it serve? Sure, it is about setting up a business, entrepreneurship. I think it's so much more. So entrepreneurship is also stewardship. It's cultural, social, and environmental stewardship. You're looking after something. I think as creatives, we sometimes at a loss when it comes to entrepreneurship. It's just a business. You come up with a business idea, you kind of think it's a good idea, you kind of do the maths, and there we go. Like, what's your problem? But I think as creatives, all of you are coming to this place from somewhere. And there's something intrinsically about the way in which you're moving into this place of being an entrepreneur, because you're stewarding something, you're bringing something forth. And these kind of sometimes more explicit, but sometimes, more less visible qualities. You know? So sometimes quite explicit about the environment. You want to take less stuff out of landfill. You want to take less stuff out of damaging or polluting the oceans. It's quite sort of clear kind of environmental stewardship, but sometimes this kind of social. What are your values? Who does it serve? What are the values that you're trying to give voice to, give space to? And that's why I'm coming back to this quote, that not all, in the same way that not all research is equal, not all entrepreneurship is equal. And that is why positionality matters. I'm not sure if you've, in the kind of readings that you've done, or in the kind of, whether it's YouTube or whether it's online, or whether it's books or courses that you've taken in terms of entrepreneurship. And there are times where you think, that totally doesn't kind of fit with where I'm coming from. The recipe for entrepreneurship does not fit with where I'm coming from. So entrepreneurship is also positioned. Where is that entrepreneurship happening, and what is that entrepreneurship project in relation with? Could be your competitors, could be your community, could be your economic environment, could be a national economic environment, it could be a local economic environment, it could be a political environment. So entrepreneurship is also positioned, and therefore it's not equal. I'm aware of the time, so we're getting somewhere. So I'm going to take us back to the intellectuals. I'm going to take us back to our dance move and to the intellectuals. And I'd like to just play this very short clip, just in watching, and maybe just to say that there are 2 female dancers in this clip. So, yeah.
That's all, yeah. Too easy. I like to move it. Some bad. Too easy. That's all, yeah. That's all, yeah. That's all, yeah. That's all, yeah.
So what does it mean to excel in your craft? What does it mean to sell what you excel in? So entrepreneurship, here is a dance group. Entrepreneurship is also about marketing or positioning yourself. So really, a view into a business. So I'm sharing this interview with Tebza Dipetlo. And again, thinking about it from a point of view of an entrepreneur.
It all began with the shoes. In the early 1950s in Sophiatown, the Panzolas stood out from ordinary folks because of their affinity for dressing in designer clothing. American jazz music shaped the trademark quick-stepping dance style. It is reflected in how the moves have evolved to suit those who founded it. Teboho Dipesho, better known as Tebza in the local dance scene, started dancing when he was in primary school. He's been a stalwart of the industry for over 15 years and has a variety of accolades to his name, including winning the Red Bull's inaugural Dance Your Style event in Johannesburg.
Well, I remember I was in primary school. I was on my way home, coming from school. Then I saw this circle there where you find school kids there making a lot of noise, chanting, whistling. So I went into that circle only to find out that there was a dancer inside, that circle. It was killing it big time, some pop and locking, choke movements there, and I was interested on how that particular person made all that group of children scream and chant, So I wanted to be that person that will make people happy, go dancing.
Panzola took its early influences predominantly from tap dancing. There are also traces of jive, gumboot, and tribal African dance. Tebza finds that love and talent alone for this genre are not enough to help him survive the Panzola dance world. He has had to invest in educating himself about this intricate space so he can put food on the table.
Well, it's challenging, to make a living out of your talent, it's really challenging because you have to balance, you have to be business orientated so that you can at least survive the game. It's difficult if you have talent but you don't know where to go, where to knock, So I started looking at inspiration, started to searching for inspiration, search for people like Gregory Matoma in the contemporary space, I started to engage with Dumelen Hlapane from Business Arts and Mentorship. I remember I took a training at BASA, Business and Arts South Africa, just to get me ready for the industry. So I've learned a lot in terms of how you can handle your talent and try to move as a dancer or performer in South Africa.
Meanwhile, the Panzola dance style seems to have drawn international attention. A-list stars like Beyonce Knowles are also using it in their music videos. A sign of respect, Tebza feels should not be underestimated.
I want to take Panzola culture to, outside South Africa because I've realized that there's a demand for the culture, for the dance, and I think many people can actually make it big outside South Africa as dancers, or not only as Mapanzula Akokasi, but they can actually make big. They can actually make it big outside South Africa. Yeah.
Tebza has found dancing to be more than just art. It has become part of his therapy. The Naledi-born star goes on to suggest that dance could heal a wounded nation.
They should just dance, because it is more than just dancing. As soon as you start dancing, you would realize your purpose. You'd find your purpose with dance, and you will do it accordingly. If it has to be maybe your escape from bad circumstances, or maybe something that you want to pursue, if maybe you want to teach, there's a lot that you can do with dance.
Despite the harsh realities that are dished out by the biggest township in the country on a daily basis, Teboho and the smart Panzola dance crew have decided to two-step and dance their troubles away. For Newsroom Africa on Channel 405, I'm Khotosile.
going to press pause there for a little bit. I think what is so important is to understand what this Pansula is doing in terms of occupying space, in terms of occupying the street, but also in terms of creating a voice. So I'm wondering if anybody kind of was listening into this interview, and particularly in terms of the reporter. And did this interview serve Tebza? Does this interview serve Tebza, and does this interview serve Tebza's practice, his community, his context? Or does this interview serve a very particular kind of audience? And you might want to go back and listen to it again. But I think my question there is, the reporter at the end sort of says, yeah, Soweto is really tough, it's really difficult. Shame, and they're kind of happily dancing their way out of their troubles. I think he missed it altogether. And so often, I think, the real story of, for example, Tebza, but also sometimes you've also felt it with your own brands, with like the reporter is speaking from a place. Shame, they don't really want to live in Soweto, but they do have to live in it. And then they do this like dance anyway, because it's quite cute and sweet. It's like two-step your troubles away. It is violent because it is not serving Tebza as an entrepreneur. All the ingredients are there. Oh, there's some nice references and Beyonce and, there's some nice ingredients in there, but actually does it serve Tebza and his business? Does it take Tebza seriously as a dancer, as a performer? No. So positionality in that interview is also played out. That the reporter kind of restages a kind of hierarchy. Dance is not taken seriously, it's just dance, it's creative. Done my homework. I mean, I don't know the reporter. So, but the tone, I think it's the tone, and I think it's so often that when one is written about or when one is described in the media, is what are the takeaways that are easy kind of pickings, but then what are the biases that are in there? So positionality is also not just about perceptions of and positions of power, it's also about a particular kind of bias in one's knowledge. So in the same way that I said entrepreneurship, when you read about entrepreneurship manuals, entrepreneurship go-to books, a lot of them kind of speak a language that's kind of foreign to your own experience. So also reading about positionality, and this is where I wanted to take the next step. Reading about positionality, you can do a Google search. Very seldom is positionality written about, published positionality exercises, positionality statements, written about from this continent. I'm not even sort of saying from South Africa, but from this continent. So most of the stuff that you read about positionality will have been written in America or written in the global north. There's a bit of stuff coming out of Australia, but there's very little that you read about positionality from the African continent. And what that has done is quite often, and I'm using this example by David Takacs, and And the title of this paper was, how does your positionality bias your epistemology? How does it bias the way you know? How does it bias what you know, where you're speaking from? So this question of bias, and I'm going back to the reporter. What was the bias that he was coming from? Is that Soweto is not an aspirational place. You'd rather escape from Soweto. So what was that bias? And David says, few things are more difficult than to see outside of the bounds of your own perspective and to be able to identify assumptions that you take as universal truths, but which instead have been crafted by your own unique identity and experiences in the world. That is only true if your own unique identity and experiences in the world are paralleled with what we call universal truths. And those universal truths are largely driven by what is universal, which is the global north. So universal truths about gender, or universal truths about business, or universal truths about, and I'm just taking the fashion industry as trend. So if your personal experience parallels that which has been kind of framed, then it's very difficult for you to see outside of those bounds. But this is a paper that does not speak to what most of us in the global south experience around our positionality. So the first thing I thought is, what happens if we change the title? Who's speaking? Can we decolonize that title? So David Tuckrock says, how does your positionality bias your epistemology? And can we, from the global south, maybe think about, how do our positionalities inform our epistemologies? How do our positionalities, your lived experiences, all the things that have made you, how do they inform your knowledge space, your knowledge making? How do our positionalities inform our epistemologies? Or otherwise, you could say, how does my positionality ground my epistemology? How does my positionality root it or center it or give it its foundation? And then as a group, how do our positionalities collectively shape our future knowledges? And so again, as entrepreneurs, sort of thinking about, how do the different positionalities in your company or in your organization collectively, what do they collectively bring to create those future knowledges? Because if your positionality grounds where you come to know from, it can also start to inform the seeds for the future. So who speaks in terms of positionality is equally important. So thinking about bias is really important. And then who writes? So again, I've taken the text and I've kind of thought through, like, what does it mean to decolonize the text? So in the rewrite, I've sort of thought few things are more difficult to assert than your voice and positionality from your perspective, and be able to confront the assumptions that are taken as universal truths, but which instead have been crafted by the global north of coloniality. So it really is difficult to assert your voice in relation to the assumptions of a universal truth. in terms of business, in terms of gender, in terms of values. Another one would be that few things are more difficult to see. Few things are more difficult than to see the values or worldviews of your own perspective. And to be able to identify propositions that you take as important into spaces which have been crafted by the knowledges or the epistemologies that have largely dismissed your identity and experiences in the world to begin with. So from the global south, positionality asks a whole lot of other things of us to do if we're wanting to put forward propositions that don't meet up with those values or value constructs of the global north. But for us to kind of think about the world, and I'm working with, and I'm bringing to your attention also the work of Rolando Vasquez. For us to think about our positionality, it requires us to know who is speaking, who is representing, and who is represented. So even when you read a text, when you listen to a reporter, who is representing, but also who and what values are being represented. And Rolando's work is really important in this because he also talks about this ethical life. How can we live an ethical life? Who is enjoying and who is suffering? So in terms of your business, to really start to pay attention to who's representing and who's represented. And so sometimes that is in your own context of your business, but also sometimes it is in how you imagine your audience. Who is your audience? Who is listening? Who are you speaking to? So some of you might want to have a look at this exhibition interview. Sami Balaji is a Congolese artist. And this was a particular exhibition in Brussels now called Overcoming Modernity Style Congo. It really grapples with some of these legacies of colonialism and the impact on people's lives, 100, 200, 300 years after this kind of colonial invasion. And we all know there's a very problematic history between Belgium and the Congo. It's just quite an insight into some of these bigger challenges that you're facing with as a business owner. In terms of what rules the world, what controls the world, what is the kind of universal kind of messaging around your voice, around your purpose, around your value system. So I know there's quite a bit that I've kind of covered, and I'm just going to end with two introductions to two projects that the African Fashion Research Institute has been involved with, just as kind of examples to position some of this story. And then maybe just open this up if anybody wants. So if there's a question that you've kind of been thinking about, I'm going to just leave a little bit of time at the end. So the first project that I'm sharing a little introduction to is in 2023, we were given a grant by the British Council towards new narratives. What does it mean to write new narratives from this continent? And we all know how dominant particular narratives around fashion from this continent. It's got to be colorful, it's got to be bright, it's got to be tribal, it's got to, there's a particular kind of framing around what is the perception of Africa. Also the how to write about Africa, how to rethink and craft new narratives from this continent. And I think all of you in your journeys are doing that. You're pushing to rewrite these narratives, to tell new kinds of stories, to occupy the space, to occupy the perceptions of this space. So this is a project. There were 3 components to the project. I'm just going to let you listen.
My name is Sheila Nachitenda. I'm a multidisciplinary artist from Uganda, Kampala. And right now we are here on a research project by Africa Fashion Research Institute, collaborating with the Durban University of Technology on research with backcloth. At this moment, right now, we are going to share knowledge on how to transform backcloth into paper. It's also, we've done a bit of background research through the botanical gardens and discovered that the same tree from which backcloth is sourced is also existing in Durban. So the purpose of our research is evolving around that connection of the East and South. The process of transforming backcloth into paper is quite, it revisits almost the backcloth making process. The material is soaked, it's shredded and soaked, and then beaten into pulp, and then laid out into sheets of paper, which are then hung. And these particular papers are going to be used in creating garments as a sustainable way of fashion production, and also incorporating the knowledge of the Isidwaba from Durban. Yes. What I would like to share from my practice is be free to experiment. Don't be limited by your environment and your thoughts. Work with what you have.
Okay, so I'm very interested in circular fashion. I'm very interested in zero waste fashion. And I didn't know how connected backcloth was to that. I thought that once you make a garment, that's done and dusted.
And so positionality is also what you support, what you strive for, the kinds of stories you tell. It's what you sustain through your business. And it is also what sustains you. So I think a really important acknowledgement is to revisit this journey around your personal positionality, but also then to think that through your entrepreneurial development or your entrepreneurial journey. What are the stories you tell and what do they sustain? And particularly if we're thinking about, future generations, and what kind of world making we'd like to support, what kind of stories and whose voices come through in that world making. So the Fold was one of our projects, and this is another one of our projects that we're now working with around fashion education materials or design education materials. Very often there are big gaps in fashion education or design education that are based on the continent. So what does it mean if we want to try and decolonize those fashion education spaces? And how do we create materials that can serve those spaces? So as much as we're thinking about creating new narratives, we're also trying to create new patterns of thought, or new patterns of making, new patterns of teaching, new kinds of archives. And so this project around new patterns as a kind of practice is thinking about the patterns of whether it's business, whether it's our society as a pattern, and what happens if we change the algorithm? What happens if we add another ingredient into that algorithm? How can that create a new pattern? So this was a creative project, and I'm just going to play the video. It doesn't have any sound, but you'll see that we had a green screen. So we photographed, and this is a project that we did in Daveyton in Johannesburg, and with a community of creatives from Daveyton. Is how do we rewrite those histories of Daveyton that have been erased or were never captured in the first place? Histories of people living in Daveyton, histories of relationships, histories of joy, histories of personal narratives. There is so much absent in the histories of everyday people. And so this project was really looking at how do we go back in history and try and recapture or recreate, so a kind of speculative fabulation of a past. And so using green screen to kind of work into histories and recreating moments from the past, so that we start to shift that algorithm of history to be inclusive. So really thinking about the impact of what the work that we do has more broadly in terms of repair or regeneration, or thinking about the world in a more inclusive kind of way. So in terms of fashion histories, this is quite an important one of our projects that we've done around this new patterns. So I want to, say thank you, really, really, really. Also, I have gratitude to my many teachers. So obviously, Lasiba, Sibiwa, and Scott from the African Fashion Research Institute. You heard from Sheila. Bungani was the creative director in the New Patterns project. Kebza, our dancer. Michelle is a photographer. Rolando and his work, and many, many, many more. So it's really about acknowledging also our journeys in this. And I'm just going to end with this. Pansula, so I'm wondering if anybody was really interested in learning Pansula dance. If you're based in Cape Town, or if you're coming to Cape Town on the 10th of August, it's not Tebza who's teaching that Pansula class, but it's Cholofelo, who will be teaching a Pansula dance class at Theatre Arts in Cape Town. So if anybody's in Cape Town and wants to get to learn, but really it is this question, your positionality is how you occupy space. And it is a dance. It is a dance of, it's a public dance. It's a public dance that we are all part of. And it's in that public visibility that you, as entrepreneurs, dance through in relation with others. So I'm going to stop sharing because I think it's really important that I also get to see the rest of the room. I think we've got about 10-15 minutes in the room because I've heard from Gloria, I've heard from Gianni, but I'm wondering if there's anybody else that would like to either have a question or contribute. Teba, it's so good to see you. Teba and I go back a very long way.
It's so good to see you too. That was such an incredible session. Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you. Anything that's like at the top of what you're thinking?
I think just that off the top of my mind, I think it's just this idea that even though I come from a certain positionality, like, being Black, being from the township, being queer, all these sort of things, but like I still need to vet, though, how do I say? I still need to be very conscious about like the things I do and how I communicate, especially as someone who takes not only my own experiences, but the experiences of others to, tell the world, so it's just also the session, I think, has just made me very mindful about what a big responsibility that is, and that I could still, in many ways, I could still be, how do I say, picking and choosing stories, and how do I say, I'll just say it's triggered a lot of thoughts, just this idea of being more responsible with my position in telling not only my story, but the story of other people as well.
Thank you. Yeah. It's just becoming aware of that bias. And it's a slippery thing. Bias is such a slippery thing because you think it doesn't touch you. But it's becoming aware, and that's what Rolando was saying. Positionality is becoming aware of who's speaking, who's being represented. It's just an awareness. I think. Yeah. Thank you, Tebe. Chimwemwe or Rafiq, who would like to join?
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I would also like to comment and say that this masterclass has really touched us because, the things that we're talking about here, I think are very beneficial and also very personal to us as well, because this positionality that you're talking about, basically it shapes nowadays every decision that we make, not just in our personal lives, but also in our business. Because, when you mentioned earlier on about, the three main influences that influences your life, I was thinking, personally, what has influenced me and what has brought us to the stage where we are now, and why do we make the decisions we make? And everything boils down to what you're talking about. Because of, for us, for example, for me personally, it's basically been life experiences, coming from the background that I came from, the things that I was exposed to, the adversity and the things that I had to overcome, the good and the bad, has helped to shape and mold me into what I am now and what we are now. And also it influences our everyday decisions, because while growing up, for example, my mother's side is Indian, and she married a Black man, right? So there was this stigma growing up, and my dad died when I was like 3 years old. So I never got a chance to know my dad, and all this was happening when we were still very young. So we grew up with this, you know, being looked down upon, not just from our family members, like, and we couldn't understand why. You know, why are people looking at us in this way? Why are we looked down upon? Yes, okay, well, you know, having a single mom and having a struggle through, you know, growing up, you know, 3 kids was difficult enough. And then not having support from your family members as well, you know, was also quite difficult for us. So I also had a very, well, I had a speech impediment. I couldn't speak. I had a terrible stutter up to I think I was in my, you know, late teens. I couldn't talk at all. I like, you know, every word that came out from my mouth was, it took like 10 minutes for me to say anything. It was really difficult. And that added to, well, like insecurities, and, you know, I'm also a big introvert. It's very hard for me to express myself. So coming from the colonial background as well, I think apart from South Africa, other countries also experience apartheid, but probably like in a lesser degree to what you guys experienced. So being in a colored society and having the stigma of being a colored and what it, you know, like what comes with it and what's expected from you also influenced me. Because like my background, we're just expected to be, you know, mechanics, party goers, drinkers, fighters, which I question that a lot. Of like, but no, I mean, that, you know, like I always wanted to be different. I always wanted to be different from what everybody, you know, like from what everyone's experiences, I mean, you know, expectations were of me, was supposed to be. I just didn't want to be part of anything like that. So it looked like I was withdrawing, but in a way I was trying to figure out myself, and not having a father figure also led me down the path of, well, the wrong path, let me put it to you that way, becoming a delinquent and all kinds of things, getting into, you know, all kinds of trouble, but that was helping to shape me, you know, and it made me question a lot of things, you know. I started questioning things that I, you know, people normally don't question, you know, having this, you know, early racism on us made me question, okay, where did this construct of what looks good and what doesn't look good, or why is a certain look considered beautiful? And I questioned, before we were colonized, what do people consider beautiful? I mean, if there was only Black people around us, what did we consider as beautiful? You know, and where did it come from that now we don't look at ourselves as beautiful? You know, it made me question so many things. And then like I said, I got into, you know, like the wrong path, trying to discover myself. So I was trying so many different things and they just weren't working out for me. And it looked like failure. It looked like I was failing in everything I was doing. But now when I look back, it was shaping me, because it was through those failures that led me one step at a time closer to discovering myself. And unfortunately, for a lot of my friends and my peers, they got stuck in what was, like, you know, like in what the world's expectations of them was supposed to be. And I think I was fortunate enough that I was able to break through those barriers and see different, because it made me question a lot. Like I said, I questioned why should I not like somebody? So I had an opportunity to go to Europe because I always dreamt about Europe. I always dreamt about the dream, you know, going abroad and seeing like what they show us, you know, like what it's, you know, what it's like. And unfortunately, my experience was not a very good one, because the bottom of the food chain. I mean, I was working in a manual labor job, and I was like, whoa, so is this what I imagined it was going to be like? And then it made me also people who back home, who I considered maybe lesser than myself, you know, manual worker labor and things like that. And then I, you know, like it made me see myself in an equal framework with the rest of humanity, that nobody is, and your choices that you make. So that helped to shape my thinking, you know, in a lot of ways. And the pictures you brought up earlier, where you're showing us pictures of Nike and and different things and themes. Because of that, it helped lead us to filmmaking, because filmmaking is also, sorry, by the way, we are filmmakers. We are based in Malawi. So filmmaking and you have to make that into reality that other people can relate to. So people don't know this, but everything you see in a movie, every frame you see is kind of like a painting. Everything that's there, they wanted you to see it. Every color or dressing or set design or everything that's on there, people wanted you to see it. So we had to question, why do they want us to see those things? What is the message that they're trying to get out to us? And unfortunately, a lot of the time it was bad messaging. It was either, kids acting out towards their parents, or bad, bad relationship advice. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, TV is our education, because we see things that we've never been exposed to, and we take that as an example. And when you when you go through it yourself later in life, you extract from that example that you learn from the TV and you act out in the same way, which sometimes is good or bad. It's kind of like programming, So we've been programmed in so many ways from a long time back, and this program has been happening sometimes for our benefit and sometimes for our non-benefit, because I remember as well.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm just going to. I'm just aware of the time, and I know that we might have some more. We might have some. So, I think just really, really, really thank you so much for sharing. Also, that you've come to your voice. And I think such a powerful sort of sharing that you've also done here is sort of how is it that you come to your voice and then using your voice for a purpose, and filmmaking, I think, is an incredible. So absolutely, and I think you've touched on so many of the threads of what it is that builds you. But thank you for sharing. I'm just I'd love to know more, but I think we've got about 3 minutes, and I'm just wondering if anybody else would like to share.
Sure. Thank you.
Now I've made space. Katlego, Gillian, Terence, anybody? Has it been helpful? Is it good? Is it giving you something to think about? Is it, where you're going to start? Terence, yeah?
Yes, good morning, good morning, good morning. Sorry, my video is off. Something's been happening with my laptop, but thank you so much for this. Sometimes I think one of the things that I keep experiencing through this program is that there's so many things that have been happening in life that you just didn't have the words for it or the names for it. And listening to you talk about positionality and knowing your place, knowing what to say, how to say it, when to say it, who are you saying it to, and how does it sound, things like that. It's all coming together to say you have an understanding of yourself, and it takes a lot to understand yourself even more, and to understand the people around you and the people you're serving. I really laughed when the first clip ended after the interview with Tebza, and the journalist says they're dancing their troubles away, and then you spoke about it immediately. For me, it was also just, making me understand that, this is exactly the story that has been told for time. I don't think these guys were dancing their problems away. Tebza didn't sound like anyone who looked like he had problems that he would, because if you listen to what he was saying, the things that he has gained, the lessons he has learned, the people he has rubbed shoulders with, for me, it's like, why are you then now going to say they're dancing their troubles away? Can you highlight who these people are, what they've done? So what you said, I've had the privilege of being in good books with quite a lot of journalists here in Malawi, or people in media, and having them as my close friends, or people that I can easily say, could you please help me tell the story? And they give such a beautiful platform. But I think also because our community is so small, I'm in the fashion industry, and the fashion industry is already very minute. The creative industry is even smaller. So it's like you don't get really noticed until maybe you become a somebody that, you know, is now recognized by the rest of the world. Even though, like, everyone knows that you listen to a prophet once they've gone to another place. You don't listen to them when they're in your own community. So it's also a matter of understanding. I think for me, it's just helping me better understand what I am trying to say, who I am trying to be, and how I want that to be seen by the rest of the world. Thank you so much for that. Beautiful talk.
Pleasure. Thank you. Olile, I know that we are at 12, but you did raise your hand. Did you want to have a last closing words?
Oh yeah. So I was like, I wanted to say this was really like mind like blowing and very intriguing for me, because I think we all work with people, and positioning ourselves, that means identifying ourselves and like allowing the people that we work with to like also like have identities within our businesses and position themselves in the business. So it really like intrigued me. Like it was like I was like thinking about that now, that okay, so now I am not the only person who has identity here. I'm not the only person who should like who should be like having identity, but now my identity, who I am, should recognize other people, the people around me, people who I work with. And now it's like just thinking about how they can like exist within the business and still be themselves, not lose themselves when they come in, because that would be quite interesting to see who they are, especially for the business, because I believe like we are people with stories and people with identity. Like for me as an individual, my best friend like said like and like one of like her writing that her mother has done the suffering for her mother has done the suffering for her, and that is how she inherited a scar. But beside inheriting a scar, we inherit identities like from the people who were here before us, so we know who we are by just tracing who they were. So that is quite interesting, because my like line of work, it comes from my grandmother, like just sitting around her machine and seeing her working, taking the pins. So that like really brought me to where I am. So I was intrigued to know how can my employees like come with their identity, and like what can that do for the business. I think it can do like great for the business, where we have this identity popping and coming into the business. And I'm like really quite interested to like see what that will be when we all position ourselves within the business.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's 2 hours. We're gonna log off. We're gonna go do that dance. Brianna and Jonathan, I think any last words from your side to your beautiful people?
Jonathan?
Nothing much to say after paying attention to everything that was said to this masterclass. From the title itself, it was very intriguing because it was just like positionality. And, you know, I think it's a combination of two words, something like that. And it was very, very interesting to see the different points that you have covered. If I start like, you know, just having my own notes and things that I've written or taken home from this masterclass, I think I will have to spend another 2 hours right here. But I don't know, since people are waiting maybe to do some other activities or go back to their work and everything around. So as Emmanuel was thanking you from the beginning of the masterclass, I would like to thank you as well for availing yourself and for making time to share this insight with the entrepreneurs. Not just the ones that you see on screen, but other people have joined on Ikoko, which is the platform that we're pushing also forth to boost the cultural space within the region. So many thanks to you, and many thanks to the entrepreneurs for staying for 2 hours, and for Uvu for the organization of all these things. So thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Erica. Thank you from our side as well. It was a really wonderful session. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks,
you so
Jonathan.
much.
Bye.
Bye.